In the previous section, we have rendered multiple shows on UI by passing props to the same show component. In this section, we are going to add the functionality of slideshow to our shows app, just like in this completed application. When we click on the next show component should re-render again with new show. And once all the shows are completed, we should start displaying from first show again. The show that gets rendered to the web page is changing over time based on user interactions. And as per our previous discussion, something that changes over time should be kept inside state object. So we are going to save the show index field inside state object, and as user clicks on the next show button, we will increment it. Okay. Inside our show.js file, let's create our state object inside show component. We will use getInitialState lifecycle method of our class component that will be triggered by React automatically. So let's implement it. And let's return an object containing showIndex property initialized to 0. Remember to keep comma in between the methods. Okay, whatever object we return from this method is treated as our state object, and we can access it through this .state.property name anywhere inside the component. Okay, back in our index.js file, rather than displaying all the shows at once, we will just pass the entire shows array as props to show component and let it decide which show it has to render on the screen at a time. So I'm going to remove this code and let's pass the entire shows array as props to show component like this. Okay, to notify, our shows is an array that has 3 objects with each object containing a particular show information. Okay, let's save it. Now add the code to create button on the UI that helps user to navigate next show by clicking on it. I'm going to create a React button element with text as next show. It will eventually render as HTML button element on the web page. Now the behavior of our button should be, when we click on it, it should update the show index field inside state object. Okay, let's define onClick event property over the button by passing it a method handleButtonClick that we will implement. So it will be onClick equal to this dot handleButtonClick. And let's define this method handleButtonClick, which is served as a callback to our onClick button event. Okay, we have already discussed that to update our state object, we need to use setState method provided by React. Let's use it inside our handleButtonClick method. I'm going to call setState method and pass it an updater function as its argument, which on getting triggered is going to pass us previous state as its own argument. You can think of this previous state as current state inside the component. Okay, inside setState, I need to return an updated state object with showIndex field set to previous state.showIndex +1. Okay, but we can't keep on incrementing showIndex for every button click because we have got only 3 shows in our shows array, which we have passed to our show component as props. So as soon as showIndex crosses 2, we should set it back to 0 so that it always remain within 0 to 2. To do that, let's get the total number of shows using this .props.shows.length and store it inside total shows variable. Okay. Now take a reminder of it with previous state.showIndex +1 like this. We call it as modulo operator or simply mod, which returns a reminder rather than the division operator that returns the quotient. Okay, on the first button click, show index is 0. 0 plus 1, 1, 1 mod 3 will be 1. So our show index is set to 1 in the updated state object. On the next button click, our show index is 1. 1 plus 1, 2, 2 mod 3 will be 2. And for the next time, it will be 2 plus 1, 3, 3 mod 3 will be 0. So our show index value starts cycling again from 0 when it reaches to 2. And hence we never cross the array boundary using mod operator. Finally, inside render method, since our shows prop is an array, we will get the show item by referring to the particular show index that is inside our state object. So I'm gonna do this. This.state.showIndex. Okay, we are done for now. Let's save it, and before we check the output, let's analyze how the component behaves with these changes. When our app gets rendered to the UI for the first time, our getInitialState method will get called and initialize our state object to whatever we have returned from it. Then render method gets called. And here we are referencing our show from the shows array prop with the corresponding show index set inside the state. Then show item contents will be passed as props to its child components title, poster and show info. And each of these components render method gets triggered, which returns some view that eventually gets displayed on the screen. This is for the initial render. Then as the user clicks on next show button, our handle button click callback gets called. And through setState, our show index gets updated to the next index in a cyclic way without crossing the shows array boundary. SetState also triggers re-render of the component with the updated state. So our show inside render picks up the new show item and passes the updated show data to title, poster and show info, triggering a re-render on each of them. That's how updated show information gets rendered to the web page. And this process continues for every button click. So the key point to note here is, once re-render of parent show component is triggered, it will also trigger re-render of title, poster and show info components as well. Okay, let's head over to the browser to verify the output on UI. And there we go. We can see that initial render displays the first show along with the button. And when we click on the next show button, new show is rendered to the page. And when we run out of shows, we go back displaying from our starting show. So everything works great. Alright. We have successfully developed our shows app. Okay, there is one more thing that I would like to discuss here. Right now, I have initialized show index inside my state to 0. Suppose if I want to initialize it with a value which is passed to our component as props, how can I do that? I can simply do, instead of 0, this .props.showIndex. ShowIndex is our index value that's passed from outside, signifying that we need to start displaying the particular show item at this index in our shows array and proceed from then on for every button click. By doing this, we have now forced the user to pass the showIndex property to our show component. If the user doesn't pass it, our component code will break and eventually we will get an error. Let's see it in action. As of now, you can see I'm not passing any showIndex property to show component, but I'm referring to it inside show component. If we try to access any prop or state field value without passing or defining them, then we will get undefined as their value. So my showIndex will be set to undefined here, and we will get an error if we check it on browser. Let's save this and head back to the browser. We can see nothing is displayed on the UI and our app is broken now. But our app should be robust in a way that showIndex is not something that should be made compulsory to be passed from outside. We want our component to treat it as an optional value. That is, if it's passed, then take its value. Otherwise, initialize our showIndex with 0 as usual. So how can we fix this issue? One way would be, we can do this.props.showIndex or 0. Now, if showIndex prop is not passed, then we will have our showIndex field initialized to 0. Otherwise, it gets initialized to whatever value it's received through showIndex prop. Okay, let's save it and check the output now. Cool, we have restored our app to its original form. Okay, the fix we have done here is something trivial. Suppose, let's say we have a significantly big component and there are several props that's been passed to it, but we have accessed them inside several methods in our component. We can't keep on checking its value whether it's been passed or not every time we access it, unless we assign it to some default value for once. So React provides us with a proper way to fix this. Like how we can assign default values for a function, we can also assign default values for our props through getDefaultProps method. It's also a lifecycle method that gets triggered by React automatically before invoking getInitialState method. So let's define getDefaultProps method. And just like getInitialState method, we need to return an object from it by initializing its property fields. So I'm going to return an object containing showIndex property initialized to 0. Okay, whatever object we return from it will be treated as our default props object, so that even if some prop didn't get passed and we have initialized it to some default value here, then we won't run into problems. Okay, now we don't need this 0 anymore. because we have initialized our show index prop to 0 through getDefaultProps method. Okay, let's save it and flip over to the browser, and we can see it works fine even though we haven't passed any show index prop thanks to getDefaultProps method. Now let's try the actual thing we wanted to do. Back in our index.js file, right over here, let's pass the show index prop with its value assigned to something in between 0 to 2. Let's try 1 first. Okay, save it and head back to the browser. We can see our show component now started to display from second show item and goes on to display the shows with our button clicks. Let's try it one more time. Change it to 2. Let's save and head back to browser. Now we can see it's displaying from the third show item. Cool. Back to our show.js file. We have to keep in mind that default props comes into the picture only when the corresponding property has not been passed from outside. If it's passed, then our default value is ignored. This is how we can make some of the props to our component as optional props that doesn't break the component even if they haven't passed from outside. Okay, that's all for this section. We have successfully built our shows app here, and we have seen some of the utility methods like setState, getInitialState, and getDefaultProps that we can use inside create class to help us smoothly build our React applications. Next, we are going to understand ES6 class syntax and refactor our shows app to support ES6 classes rather than using create React class package. From then after, for our subsequent applications, we will be using ES6 class syntax only when we want to define class components. Alright, let's carry on.